Welcome to Politically Speaking. I'm your host, Dave Szollosy. And Happy New Year, everyone. We're looking today back a year to take a look at 2017 in review. What were some of the major news stories that affect us here in the town, affect you in your daily life, and how are they going to continue to affect us going on into the future? Let's take a look at those stories. We're going to do it a little interesting way. We've kind of divided up the stories into the good, the bad, and the ugly, as a way to characterize, or at least theme, the stories that we'll be reviewing over the course of the next hour. So my guest tonight to help me do this review has been a long-time member of this community. First time I worked with this guest, we were on a town committee together trying to ensure access for people who use ATVs to get to the lake to do fishing. At that time, I found her a very strong advocate and a very formidable, articulate individual. So the founder, the editor, the publisher of the Georgina Post, a publication that's been rising in importance and distribution around town. Karen Wolfe, thank you very much for joining today.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, this is going to be good. We've had lots of good discussions on issues over the year.
Yes.
Over years. Sorry, I should pluralize that.
That's right.
And to take a look over 2017 and how quickly it's gone too.
I know. I mean, when you think that the last 12 months have, for me, been a blur, an absolute blur. I mean, so much has gone on. I've been so busy. It's like there are 2 days in the month for me, the 10th and the 24th. That's it, 2 days. And it feels like 2 days, too.
I don't get why those 2 days.
Because I publish on the 10th and the 24th.
Okay.
And it seems like there's just 2 days in a month for me, and that's why it's gone so quickly.
Well, you work so hard, too, at preparing everything. You're at all the town events. You're at all the town meetings, council meetings, to give firsthand coverage of those issues and to understand in depth the issues and the topics and the facts behind everything that's going on.
Yeah, I do my best to do that, yeah.
And you do. I think people are recognizing that. One big news story of 2017 I want to start with. The founding host of Politically Speaking, Paul Nichols, passed away in February of 2017.
Yeah, that was tragic. Absolutely tragic. He was such a huge personality in this community. His loss has been felt, right across Georgina.
And people were talking about him again during the Georgina Cares auction that just happened before Christmas.
Yes, he was a huge supporter.
Oh, big part of that. So, and I think it's appropriate as we remember the year to remember Paul and his friendship and his smile and his joviality and his gift to this community.
Yeah, exactly. And gift is the right word.
And I think that qualifies as one of the bad stories of 2017, that loss.
Oh, for sure. Absolutely. Yeah.
But let's get into some of the more political ones as well.
All right.
Let's start with one that kind of ran through the whole year, the multi-use recreational complex, or MERC. And that has been a topic on council. It's been it certainly was a big topic during the Ward 1 by-election, when because over the course of this year, Ward 1 had to replace their councillor, Naomi, who had been elevated, I guess, to regional councillor, deputy mayor.
Yeah.
And in that, so they did the by-election to replace it. And we were just talking before coming on air about how the conversation went among all the candidates. But what is going on with the MERC right now?
Well, generally, they have a general idea of where it's going to go. They're thinking, on Ravenshoe in between Woodbine and Leslie. In between those two, on the north side.
So to the west of Woodbine.
Yes, yes. No. North of. Yes, west of Woodbine, east of Leslie, and north of Ravenshoe.
Right.
So generally, that's what they've been talking about for location. We expect in 2018 they will firm the exact location for that facility up. There's a lot of people not convinced that we need a $30 million multi-use recreational complex.
And let's just stop for a second. The $30 million price tag, because I think that's key in this whole conversation. What is that to include at this point in time?
Oh, gymnasiums, running tracks, a lot of programming there. in addition to the multi-use recreational complex, they're talking about a new fire hall, which would be in addition to the 30 million.
That's not included in the 30 million. Let's be clear. That's why I wanted to parcel out what we're
Yeah, they're talking about a library. And that's not included in the 30 million
so it's
either.
30 million
it's
plus,
a sports complex with a lot of recreational programming in there. There'll be a gym, like I said, and different programs around a gym. And this elevated running track is supposed to be there. And yeah, it's pretty fancy.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, it's hard to say that a recreational complex isn't always a bonus to a community. But as far as you know, like what kind of demand or community survey was done in order to determine the scope of the development that's needed in South Keswick at this time?
Mm-hmm. Well, certainly I think Keswick needs a pool.
Okay.
And I think that was originally discussed, well, let's take a look at a pool, and it seemed to have grown past that. When the consultants got involved, they said, okay, well, if you're going to build a pool, you can do this, 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 and this. And the study they did, from my understanding, is they contacted all of the people who have registered for programming with Georgina's recreational department, and they're the ones they polled to see whether or not, you know, this MRC, it was a good idea, and it came back, yes, that it's a good idea. But who was part of that study? Who was actually surveyed in that study? The users.
People who are already actively
Yes,
involved in
exactly.
using the existing facilities.
Yes.
Okay.
And so I never felt that that was representative of Georgina's population, because there are a lot of people that just don't believe that we need a $30 million multi-use recreational complex. They were never polled, but yet it's their tax money that's going to pay for it. So I think the results of that study are a little suspect. That's my position. They would probably argue that, no, they're going to represent. And I haven't seen a business plan either, so I really don't know, you know, just what this is going to cost us going forward. If, you know, spend the $30 million to build it, but how much in operating costs and going forward is it going to cost us? I think that's an important part of the discussion and the conversation over this.
Now, part of the argument that's often raised, and you have to admit, like, for the municipality to provide recreational facilities and infrastructure is seen as a responsibility of the municipality.
Sure.
It's not going to be a profitable business. It's never designed to be a profitable business. We have arenas because the community wants arenas and rinks for hockey, recreational skating.
Yep.
But when it comes to the point of this kind of investment, without a long-term business plan of the use of it and how the utility of it, to reach in and into future debt to pay for it, I'm not sure the broad part of the community is comfortable with that, because, well, our town for years now has operated on the basis, when budgeting, is to have reserve funds in different categories. Yes. And we had a reserve fund for the multi-use recreation complex, initially called the Keswick Pool Fund.
We've been putting money in there for a number of years to build that up.
And same as we got a reserve fund for
arenas and
arena truck replacements.
Yes.
So we're not caught short when something has to be replaced.
Yes.
The money's already in the account. It's been built up. It's like saving for your next car.
Yes, exactly.
We're doing away with all these reserve funds?
Apparently, they're going to be taking those reserve funds and putting them into one giant pot. So, you know, if, for instance, the Egypt Hall has a reserve fund for repairs going forward, you know, that now might be in this general reserve pot. And the idea behind that is, you know, when the priority needs then are going to be looked after. And they'll have access to money to do that, as opposed to, well, not having it, I guess, because, you know, all the money is spread out throughout different programs and different projects.
Well, the problem concern I have with that, though, is that now, if you're going to be funding this MRC out of a central reserve fund, which kind of hides the cost. You haven't been putting money aside for it all along. So it appears that you're able to be closer to afford it, not afford the $30 million tag, but be closer to it. But then all the other debts for all the other infrastructure and utilities is hidden now, and now you're incurring a further debt for those
you sound like you're describing stealing from Peter to pay Paul kind of thing.
Like that. Yeah. Talking about stealing from Peter to pay Paul, let's take a look at the 2017 budget. You did some studying on the budget there.
I did. You know, there was a report to council just a couple of weeks ago which identified the status of our budget up to the end of September. And I looked at it and I went, wow, there are a lot of projects here that have not been completed by the end of September. And I think, let's take a look what I had here. Of the 152 capital projects, 58 of them had been completed. What that meant was 62% of capital projects have not been completed by the end of September. I thought that was high. And 20% of them the status was to be determined. So we don't even know if 20% of them are even going to get finished this year, or if they're going to go into 2018, or whether they're going to get done at all. So I looked at that and thought, wow, I just thought more should have been done by the end of September. Now I know, because they say, you know, it's the way things work, because, you know, we lose almost the first half of the year, so things really don't get moving until, you know, May or June, and that's why we're always look like we're behind the 8 ball. But I did actually have a discussion with Mayor Quirk and the CAO about this, and you know, the CAO said, yeah, we agree with you. You know, more should have been done. We probably put too much on our plate, and next year it will be different. So, yeah, that was kind of a.
So just to be clear, what you're saying here, like, so 62% of capital project monies that were already budgeted for 2017 have not been expended.
That's right.
So are we looking forward to what percentage of that money being put back into the 2018 budget to alleviate the tax burden for people in town?
Well, the budget
Isn't that a savings then?
The capital budget was $28 million, $25.8 million. That was the price tag. By the end of September, we had spent $2.8 million. So there's something like $23 million sitting somewhere that we haven't spent yet.
Okay, capital budget is infrastructure stuff. Operating, so we shouldn't see an increase in capital budget expenditures coming in 2018. I'm saying that.
Okay.
Nobody else is saying that. That's just me. I'm making that up.
Do you want to put a bet on that?
Last item before we head to break. The school board, the York Regional District School Board, has been having all kinds of problems this year, culminating in a by-election for a new trustee for Georgina. What was the context of that?
Well, certainly, I mean, there was a lot of controversy because of a comment that Nancy Elgee made.
The former trustee.
Exactly. And so
17-year trustee.
Yes, and because of that controversy, you know, she made the decision to retire. And I actually supported her decision to retire because I think the environment that had been created would, you know, by staying, I don't think, you know, she would have been doing anybody any good because of the environment. It was quite toxic, and I think she made the right decision to retire. And you know, it was too bad that, you know, she had to end her career on that note.
My only concern is that the a lot of the problems of the board and the requirements by the ministry put upon them was transferred onto Nancy Elgee and isolating the concerns of the board onto one person. We've got to go to break. Okay. And when we come back from break, we're going to talk about some good things that happened in 2017. At least we've classified them as good. Okay. Welcome back to Politically Speaking. I'm your host, Dave Szollosy. Tonight we're working on the 2017 in review, taking a look at the major news stories that have touched all of us in the past year. And with Karen Wolfe, editor, publisher, writer, everything of the Georgina Post, and we're reviewing it. We've kind of broken off the evening into the topic tonight's into good, bad, and the ugly.
Yes.
Let's get into some of the good news stories for 2017.
And there are a number of them, actually. You know, they've really moved the peanut forward on a number of issues. Mossington was one that I was really happy to finally see some closure on.
Let's just look at Mossington. Now, that's the entrance to the Black River.
That's correct.
The old government wharf there?
It was owned by Small Craft Harbors, which is federal government. And, you know, it's been blocked off for a number of years where you couldn't use it. There's always been an issue, or has been for a number of years, an issue around dredging the mouth of the river.
Because there's so much sedimentation coming down the river.
Exactly, and so it hasn't been navigable. So finally, this year, the town, through negotiations with Small Craft Harbor, were able to get $770,000 from the federal government, and they've transferred ownership of Mossington Park and the wharf there over to the town and gave them $770,000 to dredge the river and do whatever improvements they have to do to the wharf area. So I think that's a good news story. It's been a long time in coming, and I think we did okay, you know, with the $770,000. Council thinks that we might be able to do everything we have to do and still have a few dollars left over to put into the reserve for Mossington.
Well, which the reserve, of course, which no longer will exist because it'll all be
I think this one has to because
reserve.
it's federal money. And I read the agreement, and in the agreement it says that the town has to maintain this in perpetuity.
Oh.
So, and the money was to help do that, I think. So they might have to protect that from the pot.
There was some question and concern, I did hear, over whether that amount of money would be adequate, because if there were any environmental issues with regard to the dredging and any special treatment that had to go on to the removed sediment.
Well,
was that resolved?
Well, the town went out and had some in-depth studies done about that, and they are quite confident that they're not going to run into those issues. That's why they went ahead and signed the agreement and agreed on the $770,000. They really don't think that there's going to be any kind of environmental issues there.
The only question I have with that, because the area in the past has been very popular for fishing people off the pier there, but where can people park? Is it only going to be accessible by walking?
Absolutely, that is an issue. Parking has been an issue in this town when it comes to our lakefront properties across the board, and this one is no different.
So there's still some problems associated with it, but anytime the town acquires waterfront land, I think
it's a good news story.
Story.
It absolutely is. I'm very in favor and in any kind of acquisition for lakefront here.
Okay, let's talk about more town properties. Pefferlaw Fire Hall.
Yes, that's a good news story because the money for the fire hall was put in the 2017 budget.
We'll just back up just a little bit, because the Pefferlaw Fire Hall was how old?
It was built in 1960.
1960, and it was determined that it was a problem with it, or too small?
Too small for the apparatus.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it was no longer suiting the equipment that they had there.
Exactly.
All right.
Yes.
And this is on the main street of Pefferlaw.
It is, yes.
Beside a church.
A heritage church.
Heritage church.
And so council approved the demolition of that church. Basically what they said was, we give you permission to demolish it. And of course, the community had some concerns about getting rid of a heritage building in Pefferlaw, and there was a little bit of pushback from the community.
Because the church was how old?
It was built in 1886.
Right, so it's a significant historical
It is, yeah.
property.
And insignificant to the landscape of the main street there, the streetscape of Pefferlaw. So there was a little bit of pushback from the community, and we were talking to the town about, well, is there an opportunity to take the church and incorporate it into a design of a new fire hall instead of just knocking it down. And so in fact council went to, and the fire chief went to the architects and said, give us a design incorporating the church, the use of the church, and one without, which they did. And they presented those two designs to the community. And the majority of people, when I was at the meeting, seemed to be most supportive and interested in the church design. So that's a good news story.
So has council adopted that design then?
No,
go forward?
well,
where does it go now?
by 2018 January, they should have.
Okay, so
Yes.
coming up shortly, it should be the approval of that
Design.
plan. The design
Yes,
plan.
and the thing is, there's no cost difference in either design. Apparently, they're going to cost the same. So
To incorporate the church or to
Yes.
build a completely freestanding fire hall?
exactly, because it would cost them $100,000 to demolish the church. So they're taking that money and throwing it into upgrading the church for their needs.
The rehabilitation. So, maintains the edifice, maintains the structure,
Yep.
and improves the services for Georgina, Pefferlaw, and environs.
Exactly, it's a great news story.
And with no additional cost.
That's right.
Perfect. Lake Drive jurisdiction. This really has to be contextualized.
Yes,
This is going on for
Decades and decades. I mean, back probably to the early 1900s.
So we're talking about the pieces of property adjacent to residential homes, either to the west of Lake Drive, if you're talking about the
Lake
Keswick
Drive
Orchard
West,
Beach
yeah.
area, or the north side of Lake Drive, if you're talking Willow Beach onto Jackson's Point area,
Exactly.
Island Grove, Willow Beach.
Yep.
So what is the problem with those pieces of property?
Well, I guess initially it was the property, in some cases, not all cases, but in some cases, the lakefront was never part and parcel of the property across the road from it. But the owners, obviously, have been maintaining those pieces of property. They've been putting boathouses on it. They've been putting docks and, using it like it was part of their deeded property. But the town, I guess, what are we talking, 2 years ago maybe this started? The town staff said, okay, we need to resolve some of this because of liability issues.
Well,
a lot of these properties belong to the town is what they're saying, and we want to settle this.
Well, see, I think there's where the problem comes in, because as you mentioned, the situation all the way along the lake is different, even from lot to lot next door.
Yes, exactly.
Whether the portion of the road began to be used as an easement, whether that came first or after the properties were severed.
Mm-hmm.
In some cases, especially towards Willow Beach area, the lots are identified, then the easement began to be being used. So was that lot on the north side always part of the lot adjacent or not? Other places, subdivision agreements came up, you can see the maps, totally ignoring land on the other side of Lake Drive.
Yes.
So you've got a wide variety of
Scenarios.
and some have
Yep.
deeds, some have
Some
PIN
don't.
numbers,
Yep.
some it's like a narrow strip. So the road allowance allocation, what the road allowance that the town has claimed for varied. Sometimes it would incorporate all the land
Yes.
on the other side of the road.
And sometimes not.
Exactly.
So basically, they set up an ad hoc committee and to look at all of those scenarios and try and decide on how they would address each one of those scenarios to everyone's satisfaction, the towns and the property owners. So why I think this is a good news story is because it has been such an old issue that's been hanging over the heads of not the town, but the owners themselves, and I think they want to see a resolution here. And I think, with this ad hoc committee, it sounds to me like they have really made some progress with this issue, and I expect that this thing is finally going to get resolved. And I think that's a good thing, and that's a good news story if we get there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
And I have every confidence that they will, actually.
and you see, this has surfaced, as you said, almost with every new council
Yes.
coming on board,
Yeah,
or every
for
term
years
of
and
council
years.
has come on, because staff were at the awkward position when someone comes in asking for a permit to put a structure on that,
Yeah.
can
They don't own it.
Can they give a permit?
Yes, exactly.
What are the regulations that they can require? They had no guidelines. So staff was in a very awkward position. And as well, the question, as you say, liability comes up. The positive that I would add to in this context is that you had this ad hoc committee empowered to come back with a recommendation to council. The committee was comprised of residents that the residents themselves had selected, other people representing town interests appointed by the council, council members, and staff. So when the recommendation comes back, everybody's already invested in trying to make it positive and work.
Exactly, and that's why I'm, confident that they are going to come up with a resolution here that most people are going to be happy with, because the homeowners are engaged in this and they're sitting around the table and they're working with the town. And I see that as a very positive scenario.
And I'll summarize that one. Anytime we have active civic engagement,
good things happen.
Is good.
Yes.
People taking ownership for their community.
Yes.
That's great.
Yeah.
We had a big incident in Pefferlaw in the early part of the year with the train derailment.
Oh, yes. And that's on my good news story list.
Yeah.
Simply because I thought the response by the town was very good. They were there right from day one, and when I say they, I'm
let's just
talking
describe
about
the incident that happened.
our first responders.
It was a northbound train.
No, it was a southbound train.
Southbound train, right?
Yes.
And it jumped the tracks.
There were a couple of cars that came off. There was a problem with one of the switches.
Okay.
Okay, and that's why the train derailed. It was near the end of the train. There was some material there that didn't pose an environmental hazard. And like I said, I thought the town's response, and when I say the town, I'm talking about our first responders, did a really good job.
Fire department.
Yes, did an excellent job. I can't say that for CN. CN was terrible with their public engagement and their public relations and their communications. I mean, they didn't want to tell you anything. And when something like that happens, that's the worst thing you can do, is keep information away from the public, because the minute you start doing that, all of a sudden, there's something going on. They become very suspicious about what's going on.
Rumors gain traction.
Absolutely, and that was rampant here in this scenario with this train derailment, when in actual fact the material that was spilled did not, pose a threat to public safety or public health.
No hazardous materials were on the cars.
I mean, if they were the materials, you wouldn't want to sit and eat them. Obviously, they were copper. I can't remember the name exactly now, but no, and they had the cleanup crew was there within hours to clean everything up. And if CN had just been a little more cooperative with their communications, I think some of that would have been avoided. But I give full marks to the town and how they handled it.
Has CN made any adjustments, to their protocol as a consequence of that?
Yes. There were 2 propane tanks that sit beside the tracks that have concerned the residents.
These aren't on the train. These are on
that have concerned the residents for years and years and years. And those propane tanks are there for, in the winter, they heat the switches.
Right.
We have gas in Pefferlaw. And so the question was, why on earth aren't we heating the switches with gas? Why do we have these 2 bombs sitting beside a track when, there could be a derailment? And we were lucky. We were lucky that they were not hit this time. So now they've taken them away. They have put the gas connected, but not until January.
So, and this has been a concern always in terms of emergency services, crisis management in Georgina. So we're going to come back after the break and take a look at some of the ugly. What are the stories we look at there? Okay, here we go. Welcome back to Politically Speaking here on Rogers TV. We're talking about 2017, the year in review, with Karen Wolfe, publisher and editor of the Georgina Post. And this segment, we're going to look at some of the what we've classified as the ugly stories of 2017. And let's start with one that's confusing to many people in town. Certainly, I've had trouble trying to work my way through what's been going on in the whole framework. And I did bring it up with the last two councillors I had on the show as well, too. And we spent quite a little time trying to unpackage the service delivery review. Can you explain to us, first off, what is the service delivery review supposed to be about?
I think it's supposed to go through the entire organization in every department and identify opportunities to improve service delivery.
So to the general public?
Yes, exactly.
And not that that isn't needed, because often you and I have heard complaints over many years about the, people not feeling they were getting the proper information, proper notification, etc.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's something all municipalities, well, most municipalities will do.
Okay. And so how did Georgina go about it?
Well, it was a single source supplier, which I had an issue with because I thought it should have gone out to tender. First of all, it wasn't even considered an issue at budget 2017, and then all of a sudden in January it became an issue and a priority.
It wasn't an anticipated expense during the year?
No.
So it wasn't put in the budget?
No.
And when you say single source supplier, what do you mean?
I mean that the CAO went to council and recommended a consultant for this review. Instead of putting it out to tender, she suggested that there was a gentleman that she wanted or felt was going to be competent to conduct this review.
And this was the former CAO of Witcher Stouffville, correct?
That's right, yeah.
So brought on to conduct this review.
I thought it should have gone to tender, but it didn't. So that's fine. But the reviews that he's been producing these status reports all along, and I think we're up to 7 or 8, and in each one of them he's making recommendations which council is approving, and I just think, why are we doing this in piecemeal? To me, if you have a consultant doing a review, I would have expected that the review be completed and then you would go through the recommendations for each department and decide which ones you're going to, and you'd have a complete picture of what's really going on if the review had been finished. But that's not the way this is being done.
You consulted with some people who do this, right? For other municipalities?
Yes, that's right.
And what was the direction that they...
Well, KPMG has done it numerous times, and I spoke to them, and they all said, we would expect that the review would be completed, and then there would be, like all consultant reports, the study's finished, here's the recommendations, and this is the justification for the recommendations. Well, that hasn't been done in this case. But they're making some really significant structural changes, such as hiring a deputy CAO. But yet, that status report, we didn't see what the justification was for that. I still don't know what the justification is for that. It was done in closed session.
Well, and we've talked about closed sessions before. I mean, I understand if issues about an identifiable individual are being addressed, that's a reason to move into closed session. But if you're talking about the restructuring for service for the community in order to meet the guidelines of a service delivery improvement model, shouldn't the creation of new positions to fit in that model be part of the public discussion?
I would think so. Especially, the rationale. What was the rationale for this? What justifies this decision to hire another senior position in the town? A lot of people think that we're top heavy as it is in the staff at the staffing level,
especially when it wasn't in the budget initially.
Yes.
So now has that recommendation been approved by council?
Yes.
On a go-forward basis, there's a new position created.
Yes.
Is that being advertised?
Yes.
Okay, it's being advertised publicly. Okay.
Yeah.
A committee of council to appoint it, or is the hiring for that only being done by staff?
I don't know the answer to that, but certainly we have a director of HR, so I would think staff is going to be involved, and I think council would have to be involved in this one, wouldn't they?
Well, see, this is what I'm not sure about. Usually, the only function of council in terms of hiring is to hire your CAO.
Oh, really? Okay.
And then the CAO is responsible for the rest of the hiring, staffing the civic center. And that's why you have a director of HR to assist the CAO in the hiring. Well, now, but the town has never hired an assistant CAO before. I know most public organizations, for example, school boards, the trustees will hire the director, and they'll also hire the associate director, the second in command. The deputy director or associate director, however they identify that role. So usually, this should be a case, it's going to be very different if staff, or in this case the CAO, is taking over responsibility for hiring the assistant CAO.
Deputy CAO.
Deputy CAO, sorry. That creates a whole different scenario.
Yeah, to be honest with you, I don't know what is going to happen there.
So then we won't talk about it.
Okay.
Pefferlaw Ice Pad. What is happening with the Pefferlaw Ice Pad? This is another huge story that goes back.
Yes, it was a bit of an ugly because the proposed budget for the project was unrealistic apparently, because when they took it out to tender, all of the bids came in way, way over the budget. And it got to the point where, you see, this roof was supposed to go over the ice pad and a new picnic shelter roof. So the town sold
just to be clear, in Pefferlaw, though, we have the ice pad. That was approved a number of years ago, back when I was on council.
Yes.
And we put the pad in, and now it was basically to enclose it, or at least cover it.
No, just put a roof over it, and then the roof was going to go down and create a new picnic shelter space.
Right.
Because they sold the old picnic shelter when they got the design. They said, okay, well, we got to get rid of this picnic shelter, so they sold it.
Fair enough.
Then they went out to tender and found out that the bids were so much higher, and so the CAO actually, or the staff, made a recommendation to cancel the picnic shelter. Well, we'd already sold it, and now we weren't going to get another picnic shelter. So that didn't really sit well, but the issue was, well, we don't have the money, but we did have the money, and it's been, it's there, and so I actually sent an email to council saying, I've identified some places where you can go to find this money. And at the next council meeting, they decided that they would reject the recommendation to not build it, and it's going forward.
Okay, so we had too many negatives in that sentence. So the roof will be built then?
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
And then on the approval of council. So why is that an ugly story?
Because
it worked out well.
Well, yeah, but what a mess. It was an ugly mess. Yes, we're going to get the roof, but what a horrible way to go to they were going to cancel it. And they'd already sold the other one, and the proposed budget was unrealistic to begin with, and all the bids were too high, and it was just an ugly, ugly story.
Is the roof ready for this year?
No, it was supposed to be, but it isn't. It's going to be next
winter of 2019.
Yes. Well, 2018 and 19.
Yeah. Well, yes. We get our winter after Christmas now.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, they. Initially it was supposed to be ready for this year.
Okay.
For 2017, I should say.
Let's move on to another one you've classified as ugly here. RV parking.
Yeah. You know what?
Okay, recreational vehicle. People have their trailers, etc. They want to park it in their yard when not in use.
Yeah, exactly. And this is another one that they finally got to and came up with a bylaw for all of these people. But it was getting there that I found was the ugly, because it was all community engagement, and they would come up with a plan and the community would look at it and go, oh no. And so they come up with another plan, they'd have another meeting, the community go, no. And it was ugly the way that we finally had to get to the end of this bylaw, and then the bylaw itself is so convoluted. A lot of people don't know if they're in compliance or they're not in compliance because it's so convoluted. But, bottom line is they did come up with a solution for most people.
Okay, so But I have to ask again. Now, here's a case where you did engage the public.
Yes.
You had active civic engagement.
Yes.
In the process.
Yes, all the way along.
People being informed about the issues that they're concerned about and affecting them. If it doesn't work out the first time, you go back at it,
Yeah.
go back at it again.
And they did.
Sometimes democratic process take time, and sometimes it's messy. Isn't that a good thing that we are able to wade our way through the morass and the weeds to finally get to an outcome?
Absolutely, it was, but it was it was just so cumbersome trying to get there. You know what I mean? It was a cumbersome thing, and then at the end of the day, even the bylaw itself is cumbersome. But yeah, you're right. You're right. They did come up with a solution that speaks to some residents, not everybody, obviously, and they never will come up with something for everybody. It's just not possible.
Okay, let's go on another topic I did raise with the mayor a while ago too, the expense for roads. Okay, it is I think a study has come back or something on the state of roads in Georgina?
Yes, there was a study that decreed that if we were to fix every road that's defective today, right now, we would need $28 million, $28+ million to fix them right now. The budget we had in 2000.
Help me understand for a second. Fix the roads that are decrepit. What's the standard that's being applied there? I mean, are these roads that are horribly potholed, falling apart, you're going to collapse into the swamp?
No, well, some of them might be those, but I think a lot of them is let's bring them up to a certain level. Let's bring up, and there's 35 kilometers of roads or something that they identified. And what they're saying is, let's bring them up to this standard because that is going to give longer life to the road if we get it to this standard. So whatever this, and some of them might be here, some of them might be here, some of them might be here. But the idea is for those 35 kilometers of road to get them up to this standard where they're going to have a life extended is going to cost $25 million.
So my question is then, how did the situation ever get to this point? Because the town has for years budgeted an allocation for road repair on an annual basis. So we were talking earlier about the reserve accounts, the sweatered amounts of money that we constantly put this money in to maintain levels, and so that we aren't hit with a big expense at any point in time.
And we have gas tax too.
And I was saying, yeah, gas tax money should be going directly in, like a sweatered amount, for road maintenance.
Yeah.
How did we ever get this far behind?
Well, the amount of money that we spent in 2017 was, $1.7 million, which is way below what I think should have been put in that budget. I think there's some discussion 2018 that there's going to be up maybe to around $3 million. How we got there? Well, can you tell me how we got there? You were on council before this.
As far as I knew at the time, we were keeping track on a pace with anticipating which roads are going to have to be done. Well, still, when I was on council too, we were finishing off the last gravel bits and tar and gravel roads and bringing them to asphalt standard. But I'm just concerned now that this new consolidation of reserve monies is going to obliterate the distinction between where we are sweatering the money for, enveloping the money for.
Yeah. Well, we get gas tax for road repairs.
And we'll come back to that. And good news stories, or looking into the future, hopefully. What's going to 2017, 2018 going to be bringing for us when we come back on Politically Speaking? Okay. Szollosy, and welcome back to Politically Speaking. So far we've been talking about 2017 in review. Now we're in our last segment. I want to take a brief look forward to 2018. Some of the stories that are hanging over that we still have to deal with, and some of the issues that are going to be coming up in 2018 that we'll be covering later on, both in the paper and on the show.
Here, yeah.
So let's start the Airbnb. Airbnb made a particular splash in the community a while ago.
Yes, it did.
I don't know if that's a proper metaphor right now, being on the water. Airbnb, I shouldn't. That's one company. I shouldn't
Yes,
use the one
that's
company.
true, yeah.
The short-term rental, the weekend rental market that's grown here. That's the better way of characterizing
Yes.
it. A number of deputations went before council. Issues are brought forward. Recommendations were made to council. They deferred it to staff. Where did it go?
Last I heard, it was a verbal report to council that they want to study the issue. They want to get in touch with other communities that are having the same problems, and there are a number of them. They are all over the place. So they want to study it and then come up with a strategy that they can present to council for approval. Initially, they thought that might not come until well into the year, but I would expect maybe that they would bring it a little further forward, because if they wait too long, then it's going to be way too late and the issue's going to be right back on our doorstep again.
Yeah, the verbal report said next report will be mid-2018. By that point in time, all the commitments will have happened.
Yes.
The processes, the problems will have repeated themselves, and you've done nothing to address the operation of businesses in residential communities, which is underlying the
Yes,
problem.
and that's exactly what it is, isn't it? These are businesses that are operating in residential areas. And we obviously have, some bylaws that rules and that say you can't do that already.
I agree completely. This is the point. This is the point exactly, that we have the bylaws. I'm not sure what to study, what new circumstance it arrives. If I opened up a manufacturing plant on the edge of Willow Beach, I'm sure somebody would say, you cannot run that business
And
here.
there would be a stop work order on
Yes.
it, yeah.
So
I don't know.
Yeah. One big issue that's going to be coming up this year is the provincial election.
Yes.
That's going to be the first election
Yes,
coming our
that's
way in
right.
June.
Yes.
And we had the acknowledgement of Julia Monroe, our long-term MPP, the longest-serving female member of provincial parliament
Yes,
in Ontario,
exactly.
has officially retired, would not be running again, and you were the first to break the story.
That Caroline Mulrooney is being nominated for to take Julia's seat. So she's and actually she's been very involved in the community almost everywhere I've gone in the last little while since that announcement. I have seen her, so I think that she's she's
that's
she's
good,
out
because
there.
she's basically been parachuted in. I mean, this is not where she lives. She doesn't have any history in the community, and didn't want to run in the riding where she does live because it's held by a well-known Liberal member. So, for trying to insert herself into a situation where she wouldn't have to compete for the nomination, was given the nomination, and basically handed a safe Conservative seat, to show herself around a little bit would be the minimum expected, not?
Well, I mean, when you phrase it that way, you would have to look at that and think, well, that was a pretty savvy thing to do, right? I mean,
Savvy
politically.
or cynical? Is it cynical? Is cynical taking
Cynical,
for
maybe.
granted
Cynical.
the people of Georgina?
Some people would look at it as being cynical. Other people would look at it as being very politically savvy decision. You don't have to compete for the nomination. This is a strongly held Conservative seat. So,
Both federally and provincially.
Is that not a politically smart thing to do?
So is this a guarantee of
If
a
that's-
cabinet spot then? If the Conservatives form government?
How do you know that? I mean, I don't know that. I don't know if she'd end up with a cabinet.
Well, I wonder if that's part of the arrangement there?
Oh, who knows?
I got to ask you, Karen, because your paper carried it, the Advocate carried it, every place I read carried it, the dynasty, the word dynasty.
Dynasty was used, yes.
Pardon? Why that word being used?
Well, because for me, when I used it, because of the Trudeau dynasty. at the Liberal level, and this is now a Conservative dynasty.
Okay.
That's why I used it.
And that's what's
because
being...
the word dynasty was used for the Liberals, and I used it for the Conservatives.
But before even the elections, the writs dropped. Isn't it a bit presumptuous to call it a dynasty already?
Oh, and you're probably right. And I hate to actually go out on a limb and say that the Conservatives are going to form the government, because I went out on a limb in the last election, and I never suspected what happened to happen, and I said that's the last time I'm ever going to predict.
Except that we're going to call ourselves on to other predictions later on when we hit the municipal elections in the fall.
Yes,
but that's going to have to be for another show when we're back on.
Okay, great.
Listen, I want to close off tonight just giving a big thank you to everybody involved. Jim Anderson, supervising producer here at Rogers TV. Jeremy Breton, my producer and director of this show, Politically Speaking. All the volunteers that work so arduously and in support of the production of this show. Thanks very much. And of course, the viewers yourselves, for your feedback and your support. Thanks a lot. And Happy New Year to you.